Alright guys, it's time once again to talk about the mutants in After the Flash Wintertide. With the release of the biomass and all its new mutants, I want to visit mutants again to talk about them in general, not just the biomass. Because as time has gone on, I've realized new faults and problems with mutants in ATF 8 that have been lingering since the change to mutants was released, and I think have only become more obvious as time has gone on and they have now become a commonplace thing. First things first, I want to talk about Eldridge mutants, and how both aquatic and beast Eldridge mutants have basically disappeared, leaving only really abominations as the main Eldridge that you see and engage with. And the reason this happened is different for both types. For beast Eldridge, the main thing that is holding people back is customization, because it is really difficult to make an animal-looking Eldridge with the current customization system, let alone making it function correctly in-game. Like whenever you find a beast Eldridge that fully commits to the beast part and isn't just an abomination with fur and a snout, I want you to look at them move around and see how janky it is. To make beast Elds work in ATF, we desperately need an animamorph, which would serve as a kind of basic outline for people to follow. It would also give players the correct animation and weld points so they aren't just completely broken whenever they're not standing perfectly still. Now onto aquatic Eldridge, and they disappeared because of exactly what I was talking about 1 year ago, when the new Eldridge guide dropped, and it's simply just playability. Aquatic Eldridge, Gar in particular, are reliant on water to survive, and people have not moved any closer to the coastline, so they are basically unplayable. And I also just realized that even if people do play by the coastline, most of the time it's just because there's a cluster there that people just can't stop metaing towards. Meaning your Gar is probably going to get smoked, which is pretty boring. Next, I'll talk about Eldridge mutants as a whole, and why they just didn't work compared to ATF 7 mutants, and why they basically had to bring them back. And it's pretty simple: threat level. Eldridge mutants were nothing more than a short-term surface level threat. This is mainly because they were never capable of being an existential threat, because they were nothing more than animals. Most of the Eldridge types are too dumb to have any greater plans other than just surviving. Most Eldridge don't even have the intelligence to set up traps or form groups, at least not the threatening types. And even the ones that hit the sweet spot like ferals are almost never seen, and even then a pack of ferals roaming around attacking people are only doing it for food, because at the end of the day they are just animals. This is completely unlike Rad-X and the new biomass, with its existential threat capable of wiping out settlements like what we saw in 7 and are seeing in 8. Biomass also adds the whole idea of infection and turning into an Eldridge, which makes the threat even greater, because the old Elds would just kill and eat you. Now instead you have to face the thought of your friends and family turning into a mindless husk and having to deal with putting them down, and yourself suffering the exact same fate. Next thing to look at with mutants is regular pre-stasis versions. I want to focus on the whole racism against mutants and the justification behind it. It feels at its core that the whole racism against mutants was only really inserted to add some sort of depth and downside to regular mutants as a whole, so they aren't just reskinned humans that people can add hordes and tails to because they think it looks cool. It also functions as a plot device, as you can see with South Point using it to justify their genocide. But I feel like the reasoning for the racism is kind of mediocre, and let me explain. Other than it's simply just in human nature to create hierarchical systems that end in putting someone down, the main reason for the discrimination against mutants is the whole stasis thing. It's the idea that they are nothing but death machines under the surface waiting to come out, and it's not worth your time having any sort of relation with them, because it would just make it harder for you to kill them when they become a danger. Which is exactly what we see in the Coalition with the attic betrayal in Bargetown, where a mutant turned, killing people, so they purged the town of mutants. But the problem is that this threat is so distant and easily avoidable that it just doesn't make that much sense to have such a strong, hateful reaction like what we see across multiple factions. Because I don't know if you guys know this, but the full stasis time can take up to 8 whole weeks. That is 56 days or almost 2 months of prevention time. And even on the low end of 4 weeks, that is 1 month to stop a mutant from becoming a problem. And then this brings up the whole question of, if mutants are a ticking time bomb that is an absolute threat to a settlement, why are you letting mutants live there at all? And what does discriminating against them even do? Like, genuinely, the solution is to simply just remove them from your town if you are that worried. What in the world is the point of letting mutants into your town but then oppressing them because they might become a threat? And I'm not just talking about Bardstown here, because they would have kept mutants in exile, but if it wasn't for the external pressures. A good example of another faction that is doing this would be the USRF recently. But the question still stands, if the problem where all this hatred and fear of mutants originates from is them turning into a danger, then just keep them away from you. You're literally just harassing and attacking someone over something that is literally 2 whole months away if they started turning right then. Now, you could make the argument that this base fear and a few incidents would cause a spiral of just hatred and then back and forth terror attacks that would continue on for so long that people might lose the point of why they are even being racist towards mutants. And a good example of this would be Bardstown and South Point. But it still doesn't change the fact that at its core, the entire concept of racism against mutants is shallow and not really that scary to justify all this, which honestly makes this a little too real, which I don't know is something you want to see in a Roblox game. And the reason for all of it falls back to threat level. There's absolutely no immediate threat mutants pose that would cause such an extreme lash out towards mutants, which is something they had done actually amazingly with the old mutants in ATF 7 that went completely unutilized, which is outcasts. Outcasts were people who were cured from RAD just before it became too late at stage 3. And because of that, they became permanently altered for the rest of their lives, turning a bright shade of red. But there's actually more to it that makes them so good for this. And it's what happens when the cure doesn't work, because when the cure fails, they are officially unsavable and turn full mutant, but also turn a bright shade of red. And what's even more beautiful about this is the fact that the stage right after stage 3 is where a mutant keeps its full human intelligence and appearance, making them virtually indistinguishable from outcasts. And they are completely aware of it too, meaning that every single outcast you look at, you have no idea whether they are just a normal person or an intelligent husk of a person that only has the singular goal of spreading its disease, just pretending to be a friendly face so it can strike when you lower your guard. That is just so much better than what we have, because the threat level is immediate. It's right there, so people are actually justified and have a valid reason to oppress them and give them no power. Because you can't let them into positions of power. What if it's just a rad that's trying to get into a position of power so they can destroy the settlement from the inside out? You can't let them own firearms. What if it's a rad and they are stockpiling arms so they can use them to attack the settlement from the inside? You can't let them vote. What if it's a rad that's picking candidates that are soft on mutants so they gain more power? You see, when the threat is more immediate, it makes it more justifiable to lash out like this and oppress them. Now, of course, you can make the exact same argument that I made about ATF 8 mutants, about just kicking them out. And with a greater immediate threat level, the greater the reason to just simply banish them. So while the outcast may be too far in the opposite end, there is still definitely a sweet spot out there where people have a reason to preserve a sort of uneasy harmony between mutants and people, but people fearing them enough to warrant oppression and discrimination. And now on to the last part, the biomass, and how the reintroduction of it feels lazy and sloppy. Now, if you've been gone for a while and I had to quickly describe what is going on with the ATF story, I would tell you South Point has become a military dictatorship, and with the help from insert plot device here, they got the exact MacGuffin they needed after they had gotten their hands on the first MacGuffin from another insert plot device here. And this allows them to begin their final solution against humankind using bio and chemical weapons that re-add the biomass from ATF 7, but slightly different, so people couldn't get too mad about it. And the reason why they re-added the biomass again is because they tried to reinvent mutants twice, but couldn't figure it out, so they just said, screw it. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And it's just absolutely disappointing to see biomass here, and what they did to get it in-game. Like, seriously, they ripped apart South Point and put it back together just so they could have this. Because if you didn't know, what happened was all 3 sect leaders just died, all at the same time fighting for power in South Point, allowing some just random outsider to take control. And then he turns around and immediately wipes all 3 sects off the face of the earth with next to 0 repercussions. Like, if you're just gonna wipe everything an entire faction was built up on in like just a month, it would have been cool to see some dynamic pushback, like what is actually going on with the alumni right now. If you even had any idea that was going on, because I sure didn't. I only just realized something happened because their Discord icon changed. Although the alumni thing is a whole separate topic that I don't really care to touch on, because they were just a boring flop faction that could have done a lot more. But anyway, like, why is there no splinter group? Everyone was just like, okay, yeah, let's take over the world and do some mass genocide. Even the Cherubites? Also, the way this was set up was just so forced. Like, they seriously had to do the whole imaginary groups giving South Point exactly what they needed twice. And with this, they have now made the whole story a borderline race war with mutants versus humans. It's just so weird, and I'm not sure it's something you should see in a Roblox game. An ethnic cleansing of an entire island because a group of people think they are a superior race and anything that isn't them must die. I mean, who thought this was a good idea? The only thing that is protecting this story is the fact that mutants are like a separate creature or species from humans. But I still feel like this is just getting a little too dark and a little too real. But with this, they have completely done a 180 on the story they already had going. A story which was just way too slow to actually get moving and make it interesting. Like, think about it. Before this, the Sunrise Isles were already a powder keg waiting to go off, since everyone already had their goals to take over the island. Like, the USRF's entire mission here was to move out into the Great Lakes, using this island as a launch pad for that. Then you had the Voyagers, which wanted to create an anarchist paradise. And you could have even had the alumni if it wasn't for the fact that they were poorly written. Because it's been well established that the alumni are elitist and don't like outsiders, right? They think they are superior than everyone else. And with that hook, you can lead down to 1 or 2 paths. 1, the elite isolationism, where because they think they are so better, they want to avoid contact with those who they think they are less, which we have been seeing in-game right now. But the other way they could have gone is expansionist elitism, where they think they are superior and so much better than everyone else that everyone else needs to be under their guidance, their identity, and their culture so they can be somewhat more advanced like them. If they played it like this and turned the ambition from everyone up to 11, this would have been a much better story. Then you would have had places like Bardstown and South Point caught in the middle of this trying to be convinced to join or aid a side. But instead what we got is South Point versus everyone else, and everyone else's plots can get put on hold. It really feels like at the end of the day, they tried to reintroduce the biomass from ATF-7 because they just couldn't figure out how to rewrite mutants, and they did it by any means necessary. And yeah, that's the end of this video. I know some people would actually want me to talk a lot more about the biomass, but what else is there to really say other than the fact that it's just ATF-7 biomass wearing an ATF-8 costume? Like, now the biomass is indestructible, the mutants are just all stupid, at least the ones you can play, and there isn't really the whole hive mind thing anymore. Let me know what you guys think about what they are doing, and if there's really any way to fix it. And yeah, I'll see y'all around.